finished replying to Bildad, who's known for what, boys? Shortest man in the Bible. Bildad the Shuhite. He's done talking to Bildad. Bildad hasn't been a lot of help, so now he is going to turn his conversation to his Lord. And as we go down through here, we see again, Job has a very good, very wholesome view of God compared to his friends. But let's start in verse 1, and we will work our way down through verse 12. My soul is weary of life. I will leave my complaints upon myself. I will speak in the bitterness of my soul. I will say unto God, do not condemn me. Show me wherefore thou contendest with me. Is it good unto thee that thou shouldest oppress, that thou shouldest despise the work of thine hands, and shine upon the counsel of the wicked? Hast thou eyes of flesh, or seest thou as man seeth? Are thy days as the days of man? Are thy years as man's days? That thou inquirest after mine iniquity, and searchest after my sin. Thou knowest that I am not wicked, and there is none that can deliver out of thine hand. Thine hands have made me, and fashioned me together round about, yet thou dost destroy me. Remember, I beseech thee, that thou hast made me as the clay, and wilt thou bring me into dust again? Hast thou not poured me out as milk, and curdled me like cheese? Thou hast clothed me with skin and flesh, and hast fenced me with bones and sinews. Thou hast granted me life and favor, and thy visitation hath preserved my spirit. Let's bow for a word of prayer. Father, this evening we see Job talking to you, pouring out his heart. It is the last bastion of comfort to be able to go directly before your throne of grace. Sometimes we don't always get answers to the questions and in the way that we would want, or as quickly as we would want. But it is a great encouragement to know that you are so good and so great, and that you always have our best interests at heart. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. This is, remember, poetry. And some of these sections are kind of a little difficult in the way things that are pieced together. But Job puts these together in these sections here to get point across. And the first thing he's going to discuss here in the first 7 verses is, why are you condemning me without charges? We know from the last chapter that he views God as the righteous one and the holy one, and how could you possibly come before him without indicting yourself? And so he's not questioning God's ability to condemn him. He's not questioning God's ability to judge him. He simply wants to know, why are you dealing so harshly with me without charges? Why don't I get to know why? We are familiar with the State of the Union address. Every year, at the beginning of the year, a sitting president is supposed to give us a State of the Union address. This is how the United States are doing. These are the things that happened in the last year, and usually they stump a little bit about what they hope to accomplish in the coming year. This is kind of a State of the Union address for Job. Only you might want to say it's a State of the Soul address. He's taking stock of the situation as he gets ready to talk to God here in verse 1, and then he's going to start pouring out his complaint. My soul is weary of my life. I will leave my complaint upon myself. I will speak in the bitterness of my soul. The end of what he sees here is this time for Job. I don't know if there's a whole lot of hope left. I don't know if there's a whole lot going on here, but I'm kind of at the end of my rope. That's how he starts out this section with God and talking to him. Lord, I'm at the end of my rope. And then he's going to pour out why he's at the end of his rope. But sometimes it's easy to get a little harsh and judgmental about folks in tough times. And it's easy for us to look at Job and say, man, you got to pull yourself together and pick yourself up by the bootstraps, buddy. But remember, Elijah was this way in 1 Kings chapter 19 and verse 4. He just had that fantastic situation where he stood up for God and watched God work in a miraculous way on Mount Carmel, slew the prophets of Baal up there, and then as soon as the queen hears about it, she's like, I'm going to do the same to you before the sun goes down, buddy. And you'd think he'd be standing up there on Mount Carmel saying, come and get me, big girl. I mean, I know a guy. And he just showed up in a pretty incredible way to all of these folks. If you think that you can come up here without his permission, but that's not what we see happening with Job or with Elijah. Elijah runs for his life, and he's all beat down, and he's wore down, and he's tired from the experience, and he is by the brook Cherith, and what does he tell God? Why don't you just take me home? I wish I could die. In Job chapter 7, verses 11 and 16, we saw this same cry from Job. But there's another guy, Jonah. In chapter 4, verses 3 and 8, he does the same thing. And God, why don't you just take my life and end it? Because I'm tired of dealing with all of this. And God had to keep working with Jonah, and he had to keep working with Elijah, and he's going to keep working with Job. The tough thing about Job is God's talking to Elijah and God's talking to Jonah and encouraging them. But you know what God's not doing to Job? And that's what's just absolutely driving him crazy. He makes this statement, I will leave my complaint upon myself. In other words, basically he's saying, I'm going to let out my complaint. I'm not holding it in anymore. I'm going to spill my guts, if you will. I am willing to bear whatever the consequences come from listing out my complaint. And it's almost as if he's saying, I must vent my sorrows or frustrations or I'm going to bust. And when you think about all that he's been through, he's got these friends who are talking to him, and they're compounding the problem instead of helping the problem. And so he feels like the only one that he can talk to isn't any of the guys sitting there with him, because they haven't been any help yet. The only one that can talk to is the Lord, but he's not talking back. Everything he is getting ready to say, he states, I will speak in the bitterness of my soul. I want you to know that this comes from the depths of despair. Now, a lot of times when somebody prefaces a statement with, well, I was really angry, it's generally not good what comes out. And so here we are expecting in verse 2 that he's going to start out and just vent, rant, rave, and go crazy. And that is not what is happening here. He starts out in verse 2 here and he says, do not pronounce me to be a wicked man. I will say unto God, do not condemn me. Show me wherefore thou contendest with me. That is what all my friends are doing, right? I mean, Eliphaz spoke up and condemned him. There's sin in the camp, and until you get that sin right, Job, nothing's ever going to get better. And then he sits down, and Bildad goes about it a little nicer at the beginning, but basically says the same thing. There's sin in the camp, Job, and until you get it right. And so both of these guys, he's got another one he's waiting on to speak, but both of them have condemned him, and he doesn't want God to do that too. You're pretty much feeling alone at this point. A passing sentence without evidence is what Eliphaz and Bildad have done. They arrived on the scene. They see that all of his stuff is gone. They see the horrible mess that his health has made of the man, and they jump to a conclusion, and so everything that pours out of their mouth is based on the conclusion that they've come to, and there's no evidence there. Chad, the wind's pulling that door open on the porch right there. It catches, it's going to slam pretty good, scare the daylights out of everybody. Thank you. It is a difficult thing for Job to think that there are harsh accusations and assumptions of guilt because of the circumstances. And Job's thinking the whole time, but wait a minute, these circumstances are not due to sin in my life. I am innocent and upright. But everybody that speaks to him makes that assumption, and now he's saying, God, I don't want you to do the same thing. I wish you would lay the charges out and explain to me what's going on here, because I almost feel like you're judging me like Eliphaz and Bildad. And that's not, the underlying assumption here is, that's not typical of your character. And we're going to see that, because as he goes down through here, he's going to mention a whole lot of things. And the unknown thing at the end of each question is, and that's not typical of your character, Lord. Why are you doing, what does it seem, why is it? Because this doesn't seem typical of your character, Lord. He goes on, show me the charges, give me the reason. Isn't it easier to bear if you understand why? I mean, if you know what the problem is, and nobody likes to be in a pickle, but if you're in a pickle and you know why, at least you know there's a reasoning for what's going on there. But Job's in a pickle and he doesn't have a clue. He's not aware of any sin that would warrant this treatment. And he's not aware of the fact that he is suffering for doing right. Think about it. You throw Daniel in the lion's den. That's an easier situation for Daniel to deal with because he knows why he's there, and he knows he's being persecuted for righteousness' sake. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, chuck him in the furnace. Listen, they were okay with it. That's what they told the king. I don't know how God's going to show up today, but I tell you, he's going to deliver me one way or the other. So chuck me in there and we'll see. And Paul, beat him, whatever. At least he knew he was being persecuted for righteousness' sake. And all of his friends are coming at him like, Job, you're not being persecuted for righteousness' sake, buddy. There's sin in the camp, and you better confess it. So he's having a tough time. We get to verse 3. And he's going to ask 3 questions to try to reconcile his suffering in his mind. Now, the first one we see here is in verse 3. Is it good unto thee that thou shouldest oppress, that thou shouldest despise the work of thy hands, and shine upon the counsel of the wicked? In other words, he's asking, God, do you get pleasure from oppressing me? Now we look at that and we go, oh, you better be careful, Job, because you're bordering on the... Well, he's building an argument here, and it's poetry. So stick with him, all right? Is the reason for my trial that you benefit from it? Does that sound a little easier to understand? That's what he's asking. Do you get pleasure? Makes it sound like God sitting in heaven with a big club, whacking Job over the head and laughing. And boy, I wonder how long it's going to take him to get... Oh, there he is. Bop him again. Oh, I wonder how long it's going to take him to bop him again. And he's just having a grand old time. That is not what Job is asking. Job is asking, are you getting pleasure? Or is there a benefit to this? Because from his perspective, he doesn't see it. Is there any honor in it? Is there any advantage? Is there any benefit from it? Now we know what's the answer. You better believe there's benefit in it for God. You better believe that there's pleasure in it for God, because God put him up there and said, look, this is genuine faith. This is real faith. And real faith can be tested. And so Satan comes at him and tests him as much as he is allowed to. He tests him with everything but sparing his life. Right? See, it's what God told him. You have to spare his life. Job's thinking, boy, I wish you wouldn't spare my life, because it would be a whole lot easier than what I'm going through now. Job is asking God, is there some benefit that you're getting from this? Is there some honor that you're getting from this, that I have to go through all of it? And we know what the answer is, but Job doesn't. So he asks another question, a sub-question, if you will. Why do you despise what you made? I am the work of your hands. And he's going to develop this a whole lot more in verses 7 through 12. But the thought here is you usually protect and you usually value what you make. And we'll look at it more here in a minute, but God takes the time to tell us in Genesis that we are made in his image. He doesn't say that to the plants. He doesn't say that to the animals. And so Job has a point. He says, you gave us dominion over all of the rest of the creation, and so you elevated us to a special point. And it seems like you would be working differently in the elevated creation over the other creation. Why am I then having to go through all of this? In other words, he's saying, I don't feel like I'm the top of the food chain. And I'm sure it doesn't. I mean, the Chaldeans have whooped on them. The Sabians have whooped on them. Everything is, the wind tore down the house and killed the kids, and now the friends are turning on him. It probably feels like he's at the bottom of the food chain. He doesn't feel like a special creation. He doesn't feel like he's been given dominion over anything. And so he's asking God, why? Turn to Psalm 138 in verse 8. In Psalm 138, verse 8, this is a promise that would give great comfort. The Lord will perfect that which concerneth me. Thy mercy, O Lord, endureth forever. Forsake not the works of thine own hands. Job, in his perspective, can't claim this promise because he doesn't see this happening. He's actually asking the flip side of this. Lord, what are you doing here? Because he doesn't see that he is perfecting him and that he's going to be better off in the end. Isaiah chapter 64 verses 8 and 9, the passage about the potter and the clay. God wanted to teach the prophet Isaiah an important thing, and so he gave him an object lesson, as he often does. And he sends him down to the potter's house. And the potter's working on the clay. And the thing's almost made, but there's something wrong with it. It's called a mar. I don't know if it was out of a line or if there was an impurity in it or what it was. And what did he do? He squished it all back together again, and he started over to rebuild it. Now, we don't think of the clay having feelings, but nobody likes to be broken down to be able to be built back up again. But in this situation, that's exactly what has to happen. Jeremiah chapter 18, verses 1 through 10, same thing. I am working in the nation of Israel like a potter works with the clay. And the nation of Israel's having a hard time because God's molding him and making him, and then all of a sudden there's a flaw over here and they go all wonky and he has to start over again. And that's why through the nation of Israel you keep seeing this big up and down and up and down and up and down. They come back to the Lord and he starts to rebuild them, and then they go wonky and blah, 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 things all over the place. And he collapses them in and starts rebuilding them again. Romans chapter 9, verses 15 through 24. If you'll turn with me. There is a purpose for all of creation. And it's explained here starting in Romans chapter 9, verse 15. For he saith to Moses, I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. So that it is not of him that willeth, nor of him that runneth, but of God that showeth mercy. For the scripture saith unto Pharaoh, even for this same purpose have I raised thee up, that I might show my power in thee, and that my name might be declared throughout all the earth. Now, God had a purpose for Pharaoh, even though Pharaoh is rejecting God. And he is still working and accomplishing that purpose. It seems to Eliphaz and Bildad and everybody else, God has forsaken Job and he's trashed him. But if Job could have turned to Romans chapter 9 and read down through there, he'd understand that a lot of times we don't see what God's trying to do with an individual as he molds and works and makes them. And that's the purpose of everything that he has created. Of course, we love the verse, 1 Peter 1:7, that the trial of your faith being more precious than gold, yea, tried in the fire, right? Well, nobody likes the idea of being roasted and burnt and melted down, but we certainly like the idea of the purer gold on the other side. It's interesting that Zechariah 13:9 talks about the same thing, and when Jesus is challenging the churches in Revelation chapter 3, verse 18, he tells them, "Buy of me gold tried in the fire." He says, you don't want the cheap stuff, you want the stuff that can be tested and proven. And Job doesn't realize it, but that's exactly what's going on, and he's doing marvelously, despite what his friends are saying. End of the verse, he says, "Why does it seem that you bless the wicked?" Boy, have you ever asked that question? Because it seems sometimes like you wish they just get their comeuppance. They've been asking for it long enough. But that's not the situation here. Job's looking around and he's saying, I know in my heart that I haven't sinned. But then I look around and here I am sitting on a trash heap and I'm miserable and I'm covered with sores and everything in my life has just been trashed. And then I look around and I see wicked men that are prospering and successful, and I'm sitting out here crushed and miserable. And it just doesn't seem right. It just doesn't seem like that is in line with your character. And then he can look across the trash heap a little bit and he can see his friends, and Job's friends are doing well. And here they are rebuking him and spouting off this awful doctrine and giving this awful advice. Why aren't they being judged? And why don't I get a little bit of relief? And so he's struggling with that. Chaldeans and Sabians, they sold all his stuff. What's happened to them? Anything bad that Job has heard of that has happened to the Chaldeans because of what they did to Job? He hadn't heard anything bad that's happened to Sabians because of what they did to Job. And so he's saying, I'm just struggling here a little bit because it seems like you shine upon the counsel of the wicked. He asks his second question here in verse 4. Do you have men's eyes that only see the outward? Hast thou eyes of flesh, or seest thou as man seeth? Now, again, you're tempted to sit here and look at this and say, I don't know now. It seems to me like you're questioning the character of God. But hang with him for a minute, because the statement that he's making is, man looks on the outward appearance. And so here's his friends, Eliphaz and Bildad, that have weighed in so far, and they are prone to make mistakes. They are prone to look around and think that they know what the situation is, and they make a hasty judgment, but they really have limited knowledge, and they really don't have the whole picture to be able to weigh in here. And he says, God, you see my heart, and my friends cannot. That's the statement that he's making. I get that they're jumping to a hasty conclusion, but why are you dealing with me as if I were wicked when you know that I'm not? Legitimate question, right? He's saying, I understand these guys here, they're just jumping to conclusion because the only thing Eliphaz said it the best, right? All we know down through time is that when wicked people do something, and Job just made the statement, but wait a second, it seems like God shines on the wicked sometimes and blesses them. Now, that's not always true, Eliphaz. That's what we would call a hasty generalization. If you're wicked, God's going to whoop you, and if you're good, God's going to bless you. I don't know what Eliphaz and Bildad except for what they say here, but their doctrine isn't good and their advice is awful, so I don't know that they're great people themselves. Comes to verses 5 through 7, he's going to ask his next question. Do you have the limitation of time like men do? Are thy days as the days of man? Are thy years as man's days? That thou inquirest after my iniquity and searchest after my sin. Pre-flood, men lived about 1,000 years. Quite a few folks in the Bible are listed as being close to 1,000 years. After the flood, Genesis chapter 6, verse 3, God limits man's days to 120 years. Moses lived to be 120. But then it's not long after that we see the limitation of 70 to 80 years, and Psalm 90:10 tells us that. If a man live to be 70 years, yea, if he have a long life and live to be 80. So if you have somebody living longer than 80 years after the flood, they're breaking the record. And there are some folks that are mentioned in the Bible that live to be 90 and 100 years old, but it's certainly not the average. It's not the expectation. And here's the reason for that. Before the flood, you had this long life, and so you had all this accumulated wisdom that went with it. And if you are learning, and generation after generation after generation, think of all of the generations of kids that Adam could talk to. I mean, we are talking like 10, 11, 12, 13 generations down. He can still tell them exactly what God told him when he walked and talked with him in the cool of the garden. And then those guys don't have to make the same mistakes these folks did. You can gain a lot of wisdom and figure out a lot of stuff in 800 years, 900 years, right? But if you only have 70 years, it changes the whole ball game, and that's what Job is saying here. God is eternal, and he's all-knowing. He doesn't need a long, detailed trial, and he doesn't need to, you watch a movie and they're going to question somebody, they throw them in a chair, tie them there, beat them, and they do all kinds of stuff. We're going to make you hurt until you tell us the truth. We don't have all day. Hurry up and tell us the truth. Tell us. And Job says, that's what I feel like. I feel like I've been put in the chair and somebody's shined a big light in my eyes going, where were you on the day of? And we're going to beat you up until you tell us, and we're going to keep after it and keep after. And he's saying God doesn't have to deal with people in that way because he doesn't have the limitation of time. Man is limited to time, so he has to search out evil and bring justice quickly. But sometimes God visits justice on the third and the fourth generation. Job says, well, man, if you visit justice on the third and the fourth generation, why am I getting all this in a year or two? It seems odd to him. Verse 7, thou knowest that I am not wicked, and there is none that can deliver out of thy hand. You know I am innocent, Lord. Now here's a great doctrinal statement. Even in the midst of all of this, Job is saying, you also know there is no escape, because nobody else can help. Eliphaz can't help. Bildad can't help. They could comfort, but they can't really help. God, please don't fail me, is what Job is crying out here in verse 7. There is nobody else that can deliver me from your hand. So if you're not going to step up and help me, there isn't help coming from anywhere else. Now he's going to go in his thoughts towards God in verses 8 through 12. I am your creation. Special creation in verse 8. Now, this is incredible what he lays out here in these verses. Thine hands have made me and fashioned me together round about, yet thou dost destroy me. Made, the word means to fashion, to fabricate, to carve. So if you took a chunk of wood and you were going to carve a chess piece out of it, you would very carefully decide what that chess piece wanted to look like, and then you would make precise and delicate movements to get rid of everything that wasn't the chess piece. And that's what he's talking about here. You didn't just throw me together and say, well, here's Job. You fashioned me and fabricated me and put me together with intricate design. The word fashioned is the same way. It's used to describe all of the works of creation in Genesis 1 and 2. This Hebrew word appears every time God talks about he made something. He fashioned it. Well, why is that such an important word? It's an important word because there wasn't anything like that until God made it. That's the whole point. In other words, Job's saying, you made me very intricately and detailed, but there wasn't a Job until you made a Job. I'm a one-of-a-kind model. That's what he's saying here. Just like you designed a bird and created it, and just like you designed animals and created them, with their function and their purpose and everything. That's the kind of detail that Job is reminding God. I am your special creation. And then he uses this term, together. It means as a unit. We see this at the end of chapter 1 when God is talking about looking down on the 6 days of creation. After each day he said it's good. And then when he gets to the end of it and he looks at the way the whole thing works together, he says, behold, it is very good. Not only is each part good, but when you put the thing together, the whole thing works together really good. I mean, it's perfect. It just works the way it's supposed to. That's what Job's saying here. Each part is incredible in itself. You think of the human eye, or you think of the human ear, or you think of the heart, or you think of the brain or the nervous system. You can take any single part of the body and look at it and say, man, that is a marvelous creation. And then Job's saying, but you take the thing together, and it's mind-blowing. It's just awesome. God, you created me that way. And then he uses the phrase roundabout. Roundabout. You say, why is that such a big deal? Well, because it means on every side. In other words, if you were to take a 4D model and you were to hold it up there and inspect it, you could look at every single detail all the way around. And that's the picture that's given here. He said, when you put me together round about, doesn't matter how you look at me, everything is good and everything works together good because I am a special creation. And then he asks this question at the end of verse 8, yet thou dost destroy me. I am fearfully and wonderfully made, and yet I'm covered with sores and ulcers and disfigured. And it doesn't seem to make sense in my mind. It's not like your wisdom. It's not like your character. It's not like your goodness. So I just want to know why. That's what Job is asking here. There's nothing irreverent about it. There's nothing improper about it. He's looking at how fantastically he is created and saying, why would you do that to something that you put so much time and craftsmanship into? But he goes on and reminds the Lord that he is a limited creation. Look at the material. Remember, I beseech thee, that thou hast made me as the clay, and wilt thou bring me into dust again. Lord, remember, please, that I'm made of dust, because I feel like I'm almost back there again. You have molded me and worked me like the clay. Now that's a fragile substance, right? If you wanted a strongest material to hold your valuables, you wouldn't put it in a clay pot. But it's also an illustration of an incredible architect. Because he's saying, Lord, you started with the most basest of building blocks, and yet you did to me what I just got done describing, that I am fearfully and wonderfully made with all these incredible parts that work so well together. Dust to marvelous man is what he is saying here. And then he throws in here the curse of sin. In Genesis 3:19 he said, you are dust, and to dust you will return. So two things come to Job's mind here. Is this the end for me? Is this how I go out? Sitting on a trash heap covered in boils and ulcers and disfigured, and my friends making fun of me. Or maybe he's thinking, it's appointed unto man once to die. Do I get to enjoy some of it yet? Or am I going out this way? Verses 10 and 11, the craftsmanship. These are incredible verses. I'm just going to tell you. This is amazing. Because Job is going to take us all the way back to conception and the time in the womb. Hast thou not poured me out as milk and curdled me like cheese? From the simplest beginning, like pouring milk, you have formed me like cheese. Now, if you're going to take milk and make cheese out of it, what has to happen? Yeah, it's got to go through some stuff. And so he says, I started taking shape in the womb, and I started having more substance in the womb. Well, let's turn there real quickly. Psalm 139, verses 14 through 16. Good reminder. I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Job could have written this, you know. Marvelous are thy works, and that my soul knoweth right well. My substance was not hid from thee when I was made in secret, and curiously wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. Thine eyes did see my substance, yet being unperfect, and in thy book all my members were written, which in continuance were fashioned when as yet there was none of them. How precious also are thy thoughts unto me, O God! How great is the sum of them! That's the emotion and kind of the feeling that we see here as Job is pouring out his heart here. And he's going to talk about this in an incredible way, because he says, I started as simple as milk, and then I started becoming curds of cheese. And he says, then you clothed me with skin, covering my inward parts as I gradually formed, and I started to take shape. What an incredible movement that nobody can see, except we can now with the incredible invention of the ultrasound. Makes you wonder how he understood all this. And then he says, you fenced me. The root word that he's talking about here is to be knit together. The only other time it is used is in the passage we just read in Psalm 139, where it says fitly joined together. Only 2 times this Hebrew word is used. It's incredible. When you fence something, you give it structure. And he says, from something as liquidy as milk, all of a sudden you have a little bit firmer substance of cheese, and then inward parts start to develop, and they're protected with an outer coating, and then you have the hardest part. All of a sudden bones appear, and the sinews that join them together, and all of the things that he described in the passage above are taking place. But he's reminding God of the craftsmanship that nobody even can see. It's difficult to appreciate what you can't see. And he's going to bring it together and close this section that we're going to close with tonight. A purposeful creation. In verse 12. God, you did all that. You created me from the womb all the way. And here's the reason why. You have granted me life and favor, and thy visitation hath preserved my spirit. When you grant someone life, you have appointed them their days. That's what he's saying. And when you appoint them their days, you appoint everything that goes with it. I was a rich man. I was a respected man. I was a powerful man. I had family, and we loved each other. You gave me life, and I got to appreciate it. And you gave me favor, and this is a multifunctional word. I'm surprised this isn't a Pauline word, honestly, because it can mean faithful, it can mean loving, it can mean mercy, it can mean goodness, it can mean pity. In other words, when I look back on my life before this difficult trial started, that's what I would have thought of you. You have favored me well beyond what I deserve. And then his last statement, and thy visitation hath preserved my spirit. You even looked after my spirit, spiritual welfare. And so the unasked question right here at the end of verse 12 is, how did I become such a spectacle of your vengeance? If I am so fearfully and wonderfully made, and I know that I am, and you put such great craftsmanship into me, and I know that you did, and I have such a purposeful creation, and I can look back on my life and see how you worked with favor in taking care of me mentally and physically and spiritually. And then I look at myself sitting here on this heap. How in the world did I become such a spectacle of your vengeance? What in the world did I do? Because I know I'm innocent. So how do you benefit from this, Lord? That's the question he asked in the middle, right? Does this bring you any benefit? Does this bring you any glory? And he doesn't know it. But yeah, buddy, it sure does bring him honor and glory and blessings and praise. And sometimes, all the time, our trials do the same thing. They are purifying us. The word Job uses is perfecting us, completing us. Next time we'll dig into God's intolerance of sin. And you're going to see Job has an excellent view of God. He has an excellent view of God. He asks questions, but a lot of his questions are like, you know what, this just doesn't seem to be in line with your character. This is what I know you to be, but I don't understand why this is happening to me. And maybe that's why God never rebukes him for asking questions.